My name is Marcus. I'm 34 years old, and 3 months ago, I watched my parents' faces drain of all color when they realized the unemployed son they'd been apologizing for at family gatherings was actually sitting on the board of directors of three Fortune 500 companies. The moment happened at my sister Rachel's engagement party, the same party where my mother had just finished explaining to her future in laws that I was still finding myself, while Rachel had a real career in marketing. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a consulting empire for the past 8 years, and that morning I'd just closed a deal worth more than Rachel's entire lifetime earnings. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one they whisper about with pity while praising someone else's mediocre achievements, then you'll understand why what happened next changed everything between us forever. Before we dive into this story, hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love connecting with viewers around the world. And make sure you're subscribed, because I promise this story will show you exactly what happens when years of quiet success finally speaks louder than their doubts. Growing up, Rachel was everything my parents wanted in a daughter. She followed the script perfectly. Honor roll student, student council president, accepted to State University with a partial scholarship for her decent grades, and extracurricular activities. She majored in marketing, graduated with a 3.7 GPA, and landed a job at a mid-sized advertising firm making $42,000 a year. To hear my parents tell it, she was destined for greatness. I, on the other hand, was the family question mark. After graduating from the same state university with a degree in business and economics, I'd bounced between a few corporate jobs for about 2 years. Each position taught me something valuable, but I could see the writing on the wall. I wasn't built for climbing someone else's ladder. The rigid schedules, the office politics, the ceiling on creativity and income potential, it all felt suffocating. So at 26, I made a decision that horrified my parents. I quit my stable job at a regional bank to start my own consulting firm. Marcus, you can't just throw away your career, my mother said, her voice tight with worry as we sat in their kitchen. The smell of her famous pot roast filled the air, but the conversation left a bitter taste in my mouth. It's not throwing it away, Mom. I'm building something. My father looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. Building what exactly? You don't have clients. You don't have an office. You don't even have business cards. I'll get clients. I'll work from home until I can afford an office. And I can make business cards at Kinko's. Rachel, who'd been quietly eating her dinner, finally spoke up. Marcus, I think what Mom and Dad are trying to say is that there's value in stability. I have health insurance, a 401k, paid vacation days. These are important things. The way she said it, so patronizing, so sure that she understood the world better than I did, made my jaw clench. She was 24 at the time, 9 months out of college, and already talking to me like I was a naive child. I understand the value of those things, I said carefully. I also understand the value of unlimited income potential and being my own boss. My parents exchanged one of those looks, the kind that said they were dealing with a stubborn child who would eventually learn his lesson the hard way. That conversation set the tone for the next 8 years. What my family didn't see were the 18-hour days I was putting in. They didn't see me networking at industry events, cold calling potential clients, studying market trends until my eyes burned. They didn't see the nights I fell asleep at my laptop, surrounded by spreadsheets and business plans. My first client was a small manufacturing company that needed help streamlining their supply chain. The owner, Jim Patterson, was a gruff man in his 60s who'd built his business from nothing but was struggling to compete with larger companies. I spent 3 months analyzing every aspect of his operation. identifying inefficiencies, and implementing solutions that saved him over $200,000 in the first year. Jim was so impressed that he referred me to his brother-in-law, who owned a chain of auto parts stores. That client led to another, and then another. Within 18 months, I was making more than I'd ever made in corporate, but I was careful not to flaunt it. At family gatherings, when people asked what I was doing, I'd simply say I was consulting. When they pressed for details, I'd give vague answers about helping businesses improve their operations. It wasn't that I was being secretive on purpose. I was just focused on building my business rather than defending it. Meanwhile, Rachel was getting promoted. Marketing coordinator to marketing specialist to senior marketing specialist. Each title change came with a small raise and a celebration dinner where my parents would beam with pride. Rachel got another promotion. My mother would announce to anyone who'd listen. She's making $58,000 now, plus bonuses. Then she'd turn to me with sympathetic eyes. How's the consulting going, honey? Are you making ends meet? I'd nod and smile, not mentioning that I'd cleared $300,000 the previous year. The family narrative was set in stone. Rachel was the success story, and I was the one they worried about. She was practical and responsible. I was taking unnecessary risks. She had a real job. I was still figuring things out. By year 3 of my business, I had 12 regular clients and had hired 2 full-time employees. I'd moved from my spare bedroom to a small office downtown, then to a larger suite in a professional building. My company, Patterson Strategic Solutions, named after my first client who'd taken a chance on me, was generating consistent 7-figure revenue, but I still drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic to family dinners. Rachel, meanwhile, had moved to a larger firm and was now a marketing manager making $73,000 a year. She'd bought a nice condo, leased a new Camry, and started talking about her 5-year plan to make 6 figures by 30. At Sunday dinners, she'd regale us with stories about her campaigns, her team meetings, her business trips to regional conferences. My parents hung on every word. Tell them about the Johnson account, my father would prompt, and Rachel would launch into a detailed explanation of how she'd helped a local restaurant chain rebrand their image. When the conversation turned to me, it was always with a different energy. How many clients do you have now? My mother would ask, and I'd tell her 15 or 18 or 22, whatever the current number was. That sounds stressful, she'd say. What happens if one of them doesn't pay you? What happens if they all leave at once? My father would add. Do you have health insurance? Rachel would chime in. What about retirement savings? These weren't genuinely concerned questions. They were leading questions designed to highlight the supposed instability of my choices compared to Rachel's steady corporate climb. What they didn't know was that I was already maxing out multiple retirement accounts, had comprehensive health insurance through a professional association, and was carrying more in my emergency fund than Rachel made in 2 years. They also didn't know that Fortune 500 companies had started noticing my work. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in my 4th year of business. Sarah Chen from Meridian Industries was on the line, Meridian being a manufacturing conglomerate with facilities across North America and annual revenue in the billions. Mr. Patterson, I've been following your work with some of our suppliers, she said. Your efficiency improvements at Jackson Manufacturing caught our attention. We'd like to discuss a potential engagement. The project they had in mind was massive, a complete operational overhaul of their West Coast manufacturing division. It was the kind of consulting contract that could make or break a firm like mine. I spent 6 weeks preparing my proposal, analyzing their current operations, researching their competitors, and developing a comprehensive strategy. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning at their corporate headquarters in Chicago. The night before, I had dinner with my parents and Rachel. She was excited about a new campaign she was launching for a local bank. a total budget of $80,000, which she described as a really big account. That's great, Rach, I said genuinely. Sounds like you're making a real impact. It is a big deal, my mother agreed. Rachel's boss said if this campaign performs well, she might get promoted to senior marketing manager. My father nodded approvingly. That's the beauty of corporate structure. Clear advancement paths, predictable income growth. I mentioned that I had a big presentation the next day, but didn't elaborate on the details. They nodded politely and moved on to discussing Rachel's upcoming vacation to Mexico. The next morning, I walked into Meridian's boardroom wearing my best suit, carrying a presentation that represented months of work. 12 executives sat around a mahogany table, including the CEO, David Morrison, whose picture I'd seen on the cover of Forbes just 6 months earlier. For 90 minutes, I presented my findings and recommendations. I showed them how they could reduce manufacturing costs by 32%, improve delivery times by 40%, and increase overall productivity by 51% over 18 months. The financial impact of my proposed changes would save them approximately $47 million annually. When I finished, the room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then David Morrison started asking questions. Sharp, probing questions that showed he understood exactly what I was proposing and why it would work. Other executives chimed in with their concerns and considerations. 2 hours later, David Morrison shook my hand and said, "Mr. Patterson, we'd like to move forward with your proposal. We're talking about a 3-year engagement worth approximately $12 million. I maintained my composure in the meeting, but as soon as I got to my rental car in the Meridian parking garage, I called my business partner and screamed with joy. That contract changed everything. The Meridian project wasn't just lucrative, it was transformative. Working with their executive team exposed me to challenges and solutions at a scale I'd never experienced. I had to hire 15 additional consultants, rent larger office space, and implement systems to manage the complexity of the engagement. More importantly, the success of the Meridian project opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Within 6 months, I was fielding calls from competitors who wanted to understand how Meridian had achieved such dramatic improvements. Within a year, 3 other Fortune 500 companies had engaged my firm for similar projects. By the end of year 5, Patterson Strategic Solutions had 43 employees, annual revenue of $28 million, and a client list that read like a who's who of American industry. We'd been featured in Harvard Business Review, and I'd been invited to speak at conferences in New York, Los Angeles, and London. But at family dinners, I was still just Marcus who did some consulting. Rachel had been promoted to senior marketing manager and was now making $87,000. She'd moved to a nicer condo and traded her Camry for a BMW lease. She'd also started dating Kevin, a financial advisor who made decent money and checked all the boxes my parents were looking for in a future son-in-law. Kevin manages over $50 million in client assets, my father would brag to relatives, as if Kevin's professional success reflected well on our entire family. At family gatherings, Kevin would ask me about my little consulting business with the kind of polite interest you'd show a child describing their lemonade stand. "That's interesting," he'd say when I mentioned working with manufacturing companies. "I have some clients in manufacturing. They're always looking for ways to cut costs. Maybe I could refer some business your way." I'd thank him politely, not mentioning that my smallest current client generated more annual revenue than Kevin's entire client portfolio was worth. The disconnect was becoming almost comical, but I wasn't ready to bridge it yet. I was too busy scaling my business, and honestly, I was curious to see how long this perception would persist. In year 6, 3 significant things happened that would eventually shatter my family's misconceptions about my career. First, I was elected to the board of directors at Meridian Industries. David Morrison had been impressed not just with my consulting work, but with my strategic thinking and industry knowledge. When a board position opened up, he recommended me for consideration. Joining the Meridian board came with significant prestige and a compensation package that alone exceeded Rachel's annual salary. But more than the money, it gave me influence over decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions in revenue. Second, I was invited to join the boards of two other companies where I'd done successful consulting work: Hartwell Technologies and Coastal Logistics. Both were Fortune 500 companies in different industries, and having me on their boards represented their confidence in my judgment and expertise. Third, Forbes published a profile of me titled The Quiet Revolutionary: How Marcus Patterson is Transforming American Manufacturing. The article detailed my background, my company's rapid growth, and my unique approach to operational efficiency. They estimated my personal net worth at $38 million. The morning the article came out, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Reporters, potential clients, industry colleagues. Everyone wanted to talk. By noon, I'd had 12 interview requests and 27 new business inquiries. But I didn't call my parents. I'd learned over the years that sharing my professional victories with them only seemed to make them uncomfortable. They'd respond with lukewarm congratulations followed by warnings about overconfidence or reminders that success can be fleeting. So I kept the Forbes article to sheer myself, along with the board positions and the speaking engagements and the growing recognition within my industry. From their perspective, I was still just getting by with my consulting work, while Rachel was the family's shining star. Rachel's engagement to Kevin was announced at Easter dinner during my 7th year in business. They'd been dating for 2 years, and the proposal had happened during a weekend trip to Napa Valley, a fact that would be mentioned approximately 47 times throughout the evening. Kevin rented a private vineyard for the proposal. My mother gushed to my Aunt Linda. Rachel said it was the most romantic thing she'd ever experienced. Kevin beamed as he showed off his planning skills, describing how he'd coordinated with the vineyard staff, hired a photographer to capture the moment, and even arranged for a string quartet to play Rachel's favorite song. "The ring is gorgeous, too," Rachel said, extending her hand to show off a 2-carat solitaire. Kevin designed it himself. My father clapped Kevin on the back. "Welcome to the family, son. We couldn't be happier." Throughout the evening, the conversation revolved around wedding plans, Kevin's promotion to senior financial advisor, and Rachel's latest campaign success. I sat quietly, genuinely happy for my sister, but also acutely aware of how little my own life seemed to matter to anyone at the table. "Marcus, you'll be in the wedding party, of course," Rachel said during dessert. "Kevin's brothers are his groomsmen, so you'll be walking with my college roommate Amy." "I'd be honored," I said, and I meant it. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my family's perceptions, I loved my sister and wanted to support her big day. My mother leaned over and patted my hand. "Maybe being around all that romance will inspire you to settle down too, honey. You're 33 now. Don't you want to find someone special?" Before I could answer, my father chimed in. "First, he needs to get his career stabilized. Women want security, Marcus. They want to know their partner can provide for a family." The implication was clear. Until I got a real job like Rachel and Kevin, I wasn't ready for serious relationships. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly dating someone for 8 months, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a cardiothoracic surgeon I'd met at a charity gala. Jennifer was brilliant, accomplished, and completely unimpressed by my family's definition of success. She understood the demands of building something meaningful from nothing because she'd done it herself in one of the most challenging fields in medicine. But I'd learned not to share personal details with my family unless I wanted them analyzed, questioned, and ultimately dismissed as impractical or temporary. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in June at the country club where Kevin's parents were members. It would be an elegant affair, Cocktails, dinner, dancing, and about 120 guests, including extended family, friends, and Kevin's professional colleagues. In the weeks leading up to the party, every family conversation revolved around the event. My mother was helping Rachel choose her dress. My father was coordinating with Kevin's father about the guest list, and everyone was excitedly discussing who would be there. Kevin's boss is coming, my mother announced during one of our weekly check-in calls. He manages the entire regional office, over 200 financial advisors. Rachel says he's been very impressed with Kevin's performance. That's great, Mom. And Kevin's biggest client is coming too. He owns a chain of furniture stores across 3 states. Kevin said managing his portfolio alone generates over $40,000 in annual fees. I made appropriate sounds of interest while reviewing quarterly reports from my 3 board positions. Are you bringing anyone to the party? She asked. I thought about Jennifer, who would be in Seattle that weekend performing a complex cardiac surgery that had been scheduled for months. I might bring someone, I said vaguely. Oh, that's wonderful. Is she someone we've met? No, Mom. Her name is Jennifer. She's a doctor. There was a pause. A doctor? What kind of doctor? A surgeon. Cardiac surgery. Another pause. How did you meet a cardiac surgeon, honey? The question came with just enough skepticism to suggest she couldn't quite believe I was dating someone so accomplished. At a charity event, I said simply. Well, that sounds lovely. We can't wait to meet her. But Jennifer couldn't make it to the engagement party, which meant I'd be attending solo while Rachel and Kevin were surrounded by their successful, stable, thoroughly impressive circle of friends and colleagues. I was genuinely looking forward to celebrating my sister's happiness. I just wasn't looking forward to another evening of explaining what I did for work to people who'd already been told I was the family member who still hasn't quite figured things out. The morning of Rachel's engagement party, I woke up in my downtown Chicago hotel room to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My heart started racing. That many urgent messages usually meant either a family emergency or a business crisis. The first call was from Sarah Chen at Meridian Industries. Marcus, I hope I'm not waking you, but I wanted to be the first to congratulate you. The board voted unanimously to approve the Asia expansion proposal. David wants to announce it at Monday's investor call. The Asia expansion was a project I'd been developing for 8 months, a comprehensive strategy to establish Meridian's manufacturing presence in Southeast Asia. If successful, it would generate an estimated $2.4 billion in new revenue over 5 years and position the company as a dominant force in emerging markets. The next call was from James Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Technologies. Marcus, outstanding work on the product development restructure. The board approved your recommendations this morning. We're projecting 37% faster time to market for new products based on your proposed changes. 3 more calls were from business reporters who'd gotten wind of the Meridian announcement and wanted comments about my role in the expansion strategy. But the call that really got my attention came from Elizabeth Morrison, no relation to David Morrison from Meridian, who is the managing editor of Industry Week magazine. Mr. Patterson, we'd like to feature you on the cover of our September issue. The story would focus on your unique approach to board governance and how you've become one of the most influential voices in corporate strategy despite being under 35. We're calling it The New Guard: Young Leaders Reshaping American Industry. A magazine cover, my face on newsstands across the country. As I returned phone calls and responded to emails, I realized that this was one of those pivotal days when everything shifts. The kind of day that makes you reassess not just where you are, but how you got there and where you're going next. I was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when my phone rang again. This time, it was Jennifer calling from Seattle. I just saw the news about Meridian, she said. Marcus, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means for your company? I'm starting to, I admitted. You sound subdued. I expected you to be doing cartwheels in your hotel room. I laughed. I'm processing it all. And I have my sister's engagement party tonight, so I'm trying to shift mental gears. There was a pause. Are you going to tell your family about everything that's happening with your business? It was a question Jennifer had asked before. She'd met my parents briefly when they'd visited Chicago, and she'd been diplomatically puzzled by their apparent lack of awareness about my professional success. I don't know, I said honestly. They have their narrative about who I am and what I do. I'm not sure they're ready to hear a different story. Marcus, Jennifer said gently, maybe the question isn't whether they're ready to hear it. Maybe the question is whether you're ready to tell it. I spent the afternoon walking around downtown Chicago, trying to clear my head before the evening's festivities. The morning's phone calls had left me feeling unmoored in a way I hadn't expected. For 8 years, I'd been comfortable existing in two separate worlds: the professional realm where I was recognized as an innovative strategist and successful entrepreneur, and the family realm where I was the wayward son who'd never quite gotten his act together. The separation had served me well. It kept me humble, kept me focused on building my business rather than defending it, and honestly, it had been easier than trying to bridge the gap between my family's expectations and my actual reality. But Jennifer's question kept echoing in my mind. Was I ready to tell a different story? At 5 o'clock, I returned to my hotel room to get ready for the party. I'd brought 2 suits, a conservative navy blue that would help me blend in with the country club crowd, and a charcoal gray Tom Ford that I'd worn to board meetings and industry galas. I stared at both options for several minutes. The navy suit was the safe choice. It said, responsible family member who's trying to fit in. The charcoal suit was more fitted, more expensive, more confident. It said, I belong wherever I choose to be. I put on the charcoal suit. As I adjusted my tie, a silk hermé that had been a gift from the Hartwell Technologies board, I realized I'd made a decision without fully acknowledging it. Tonight, I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't planning to make a grand announcement or create drama. But I also wasn't going to deflect questions about my work or downplay my accomplishments. If people asked what I did, I'd tell them. If they wanted details, I'd provide them. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus the family member and Marcus the business leader were going to exist in the same room. The drive to the country club took 25 minutes through Chicago's summer evening traffic. As I pulled into the circular driveway and handed my keys to the valet, I felt a familiar mix of anticipation and resignation that came with family gatherings. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't going to be the family member they worried about. Tonight, I was going to be exactly who I'd become. The country club's main ballroom had been transformed for Rachel's engagement party. Soft lighting, elegant floral arrangements, and a jazz trio playing in the corner created the perfect atmosphere for celebration. About 60 people had already arrived, mingling with cocktails and appetizers while Rachel and Kevin worked the room like the happy couple they were. I spotted my parents near the bar, deep in conversation with Kevin's parents. My mother wore her favorite black dress and the pearl necklace my father had given her for their 25th anniversary. She looked radiant. This was exactly the kind of event she lived for, celebrating her daughter's happiness with style and grace. Marcus! Rachel appeared at my elbow looking stunning in a navy blue cocktail dress. You made it. You look great. Is that a new suit? Thanks, Rach. You look beautiful. How are you feeling? Overwhelmed, excited, grateful. All of it. She squeezed my arm. I'm so glad you're here. Come on, let me introduce you to some of Kevin's colleagues. As we walked across the room, I noticed the subtle dynamics of the gathering. Kevin's friends and colleagues clustered in one area, discussing interest rates and market trends. Rachel's college friends occupied another corner, catching up on career moves and relationship updates. Extended family members from both sides circulated throughout, making polite conversation, and admiring the venue. "Everyone, this is my brother Marcus," Rachel announced as we approached a group of well-dressed men in their 30s. "Marcus, these are Kevin's colleagues from the firm." A tall man with prematurely gray hair extended his hand. "Tom Bradley, Regional Manager. Great to meet you, Marcus. Kevin tells me you're in consulting?" "That's right." "What kind of consulting?" asked another man, introducing himself as Mike Chen. "Operational efficiency, strategic planning, mostly with manufacturing companies." Tom nodded politely. "Sounds interesting. Are you with one of the big firms? McKinsey, Bain, something like that?" "No, I run my own company." There was a brief pause as the group processed this information. In their world, working for a prestigious consulting firm carried more weight than running your own small business. "That's brave," Mike said. "The entrepreneurial route. How long have you been at it?" "8 years." "Wow, you've really stuck with it," Tom said with the kind of encouraging tone you'd use with someone who'd been trying unsuccessfully to make something work for far too long. Before I could respond, Kevin appeared with a glass of wine in his hand and a slightly flushed face that suggested he'd already had a few drinks. "Marcus, glad you could make it, buddy. Are you meeting everyone?" "Just getting started," I said. Kevin threw his arm around my shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to be friendly but felt condescending. "Guys, Marcus here is the family entrepreneur. He's been building his consulting business for years now. Real bootstrap operation." The way he said it, with affectionate dismissal, made it clear that he viewed my career as a hobby that I hadn't yet outgrown. His colleagues smiled politely, the way people do when they're not sure how to respond to information that doesn't quite fit their frame of reference. "That's admirable," Tom said. "It takes real dedication to stick with something like that." I was saved from responding by my mother's voice calling my name from across the room. "Marcus, honey, come here. I want you to meet Kevin's boss." As I excused myself from the group, I could feel their eyes following me with the kind of sympathetic interest reserved for family members who hadn't quite lived up to their potential. This was exactly the dynamic I'd been avoiding for 8 years. Kevin's boss turned out to be Richard Carlson, a man in his early 50s with the kind of confident bearing that comes from years of successful leadership. He managed over 200 financial advisors across the Midwest and had built a reputation as one of the most effective regional managers in the company. "Richard, this is Marcus, Rachel's brother," my mother said with the bright smile she used when she was particularly proud of something. "Marcus runs his own consulting business." Richard's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Pleasure to meet you. Marcus, Kevin speaks very highly of you. Consulting? That's a challenging field. What's your specialty?" Before I could answer, my father jumped in. "Marcus works with manufacturing companies, helping them streamline their operations. He's been building his client base for several years now." The way my father phrased it, building his client base for several years, made it sound like I was still in the early stages of getting my business off the ground. "Manufacturing is certainly a critical sector," Richard said diplomatically. "I imagine there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in that space." "There is," I agreed. "Most manufacturing companies are still operating with systems and processes that were designed decades ago. Small improvements in efficiency can translate to millions in cost savings." Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. "Millions? That's significant impact. What size companies are you working with?" This was the moment where I usually deflected or gave a vague answer, but tonight I'd decided to be honest. Mostly Fortune 500 companies. My largest client has annual revenue of about $47 billion. The casual mention of $47 billion landed like a small bomb in our conversation circle. Richard's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. "$47 billion?" he repeated. "That would put them in the top 100 companies in the country." "Top 50, actually," I said. My parents were staring at me with confused expressions, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Marcus, my mother said carefully, you never mentioned working with companies that large. Before I could respond, Richard asked, which company, if you don't mind me asking? I hesitated for a moment, then decided to continue being honest. Meridian Industries. Richard went completely still. You're working with Meridian Industries? I serve on their board of directors. The words hung in the air like a revelation that nobody quite knew how to process. My parents looked bewildered. Richard looked stunned. Kevin, who had been approaching our group with fresh drinks, stopped mid-stride. Did you say you're on the board of Meridian Industries? Richard asked slowly. That's correct. Meridian Industries, he repeated, as if saying it again would help him understand. The manufacturing conglomerate, 50,000 employees, 47 billion in annual revenue. Yes. My father found his voice first. Marcus, what exactly are you saying? Before I could answer, Richard stepped closer, his entire demeanor changed. Mr. Patterson, Marcus, I need to ask you something. Are you the Marcus Patterson who was featured in Forbes last year? The article about transforming American manufacturing? Every conversation in our immediate vicinity stopped. People turned to look at us, sensing that something significant was happening but not sure what. Yes, I said simply. Richard stared at me for a long moment, then turned to my parents. Do you realize your son is one of the most respected strategic consultants in the country? His company generates tens of millions in revenue annually. He sits on 3 Fortune 500 boards. He's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Industry Week. He's considered a thought leader in corporate strategy. My mother's face had gone pale. Marcus, is this true? The entire ballroom seemed to have gone quiet, though I knew that was just my perception. In reality, probably only a dozen people were close enough to hear our conversation. But those dozen people included Kevin, Rachel, Kevin's parents, several of his colleagues, and various extended family members. I looked at my sister, who was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Yes, I said quietly. It's true. The silence that followed felt endless. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it without speaking. My father kept blinking, as if trying to clear his vision. Kevin looked like he'd been slapped. Rachel was the first to find her voice. Marcus, I don't understand. You never said... I mean, we thought... You thought I was barely getting by, I finished gently. I know. Richard Carlson was still staring at me with something approaching awe. Mr. Patterson, I have to tell you, I've read your Harvard Business Review articles. Your work on supply chain optimization is brilliant. And the Meridian transformation, the entire business community has been talking about it for 2 years. Kevin's colleague Tom had apparently been listening from nearby and stepped into our circle. Wait, you're Marcus Patterson? From Patterson Strategic Solutions? I nodded. Holy shit, Tom said, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, excuse my language, but your company, you're the one who revolutionized manufacturing efficiency metrics. We studied your work in our MBA program. More people were gathering now, drawn by the energy of the conversation. I could see confusion spreading through the crowd as Kevin's successful, impressive colleagues began treating the family's struggling entrepreneur with sudden respect and attention. My mother finally managed to speak. Marcus, honey, I'm so confused. If you're as successful as Richard is saying, why didn't you ever tell us? It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself all evening. Mom, I tried to tell you. For years, every time I mentioned a big client or a successful project, you'd respond with warnings about the instability of entrepreneurship. You'd remind me that Rachel had health insurance and a steady paycheck. You'd ask what I'd do if my clients stopped paying me. I paused, looking around at the faces staring at me, some confused, some impressed, some calculating. After a while, it became easier to just let you think what you wanted to think. You were so proud of Rachel's corporate success, and she deserved that pride. I didn't want to compete with that or diminish it. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears. Marcus, I had no idea. All this time I thought, God, I must have sounded so patronizing, talking about the benefits of corporate jobs and stable careers. You were sharing what worked for you, I said. There's nothing wrong with that. Kevin, who had been unnaturally quiet, suddenly spoke up. So, when you said you were doing okay with your consulting work, you were actually making what exactly? There was something in his tone, a challenge, maybe, or disbelief, that made several people in our group shift uncomfortably. Kevin, Rachel said quietly, but he held up a hand. No, I'm genuinely curious. Because if Marcus is really as successful as everyone is saying, then he gestured vaguely around the room. I mean, this changes things, doesn't it? I could see where this was heading, and I didn't like it. Kevin had built his identity around being the stable, successful partner who was elevating Rachel's status in the family. If I was actually more successful than he was, it threatened that narrative. Kevin, I said carefully, my success doesn't diminish yours. You've built a great career, and you make Rachel happy. That's what matters. But Kevin wasn't letting it go. I'm just trying to understand the numbers here. Richard said your company generates tens of millions in revenue. What does that translate to for you personally? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, I could feel people holding their breath, sensing drama but not sure what form it would take. I looked at Rachel, who was watching me with wide eyes. I looked at my parents, who still seemed to be processing everything they'd learned in the past 10 minutes. I looked at Kevin, whose face had taken on a slightly aggressive cast, and I made another decision. My personal income last year was just over $12 million, I said quietly. But Kevin, that's not... I didn't get to finish the sentence. Kevin's face went red, then white. Several people in our group made audible gasps. My mother grabbed my father's arm for support. 12 million? Kevin repeated, his voice strained. Before I could respond, Richard Carlson started laughing, not mockingly, but with genuine delight. Of course it was, he said, shaking his head. Marcus, forgive me, but this is incredible. Your family has been worried about your financial stability while you've been earning more in a year than most people make in a lifetime. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Kevin's colleagues, who had been politely tolerating the family entrepreneur 10 minutes earlier, were now looking at me with the kind of respect usually reserved for celebrities or heads of state. Tom Bradley was already reaching for his business card, clearly hoping to establish some kind of professional connection. My extended family members, who had overheard parts of the conversation, were beginning to gather around us with confused but interested expressions. Aunt Linda, who had spent years offering me unsolicited career advice, was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. My parents looked shell-shocked. My father, who had spent 8 years subtly encouraging me to find a real job, was opening and closing his mouth without producing any sound. But it was Rachel's reaction that concerned me most. She was staring at me with an expression that cycled through surprise, hurt, confusion, and something that might have been anger. Rachel, I started, but she held up a hand. Marcus, can we talk privately for a minute? She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and walked toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. I followed, acutely aware that half the party was watching us go. When we reached a spot near the windows overlooking the golf course, Rachel turned to face me. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. 8 years, Marcus. For 8 years you let us think you were struggling. You let mom and dad worry about you. You let me patronize you with advice about career stability and benefits packages. Rachel, I never wanted. Do you know how many times I've defended your choices to other people? How many times I've explained that you were finding your path or building something meaningful? I felt sorry for you, Marcus. I felt sorry for my incredibly successful brother because I thought he was barely making ends meet. The hurt in her voice was harder to bear than I'd expected. I'm sorry, I said. I really am. But every time I tried to share good news about my business, you and mom and dad would respond with concerns about sustainability and warnings about overconfidence. It became easier to just keep my professional life separate. So you lied to us. I never lied. I just didn't correct your assumptions. Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's semantics, and you know it. I started to respond, but she wasn't finished. And tonight, of all nights, you chose to reveal all of this at my engagement party, in front of Kevin's boss, his colleagues, our entire family. You couldn't have found a more private way to have this conversation? That stung because there was truth in it. I hadn't planned for the revelation to happen this way, but I also hadn't tried to prevent it once it started. You're right, I said. The timing was terrible, and I'm sorry about that. I didn't plan for it to come out like this. But you're not sorry about keeping it from us for 8 years. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said finally. I'm not sorry about that. Rachel, look at how you're reacting right now. Look at how Kevin reacted. Look at how everyone is treating me differently now that they know about my income. This is exactly why I kept it private. That's not fair, isn't it? 5 minutes ago, Kevin was introducing me to his colleagues as the family entrepreneur with a bootstrap operation. Now those same colleagues are asking for my business card and talking about MBA programs that studied my work. The only thing that changed was their perception of my bank account. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening golf course. You're right about Kevin, she said finally. He's not handling this well. I looked back toward the main group, where Kevin was in animated conversation with his father and several colleagues. His body language was tense, defensive. He'll be okay, I said. This is just a shock. He's built his identity around being the successful, stable guy. Learning that his future brother-in-law is wealthier than he is challenges that narrative. Is that really what you think this is about? Money? I considered the question. Not entirely, but it's definitely part of it. Kevin takes pride in being able to provide for you, in being the kind of partner your parents approve of. Finding out that I'm more financially successful than he is makes him question his role in the family dynamic. Rachel sighed. This is so screwed up. It doesn't have to be. Nothing fundamental has changed. You love Kevin. He loves you. You're building a life together. My bank account doesn't affect any of that. But even as I said it, I could see that wasn't entirely true. The family dynamic had shifted, and there was no going back to the comfortable narrative where Rachel was the responsible success story, and I was the well-meaning but impractical dreamer. When we returned to the main party, the energy had changed completely. Word had spread through the crowd about my professional success, and I found myself surrounded by people who suddenly wanted to talk business, ask for advice, or simply associate themselves with someone they now viewed as important. Kevin's colleagues were particularly eager to connect. Tom Bradley cornered me near the bar with questions about market trends and investment opportunities. Mike Chen wanted to know if I'd ever consider speaking at their firm's quarterly meeting. Even Richard Carlson, who had initially seemed impressed but professional, was now treating me like a potential client or business partner. My parents stood slightly apart from the crowd, still looking dazed. I could see them whispering to each other, probably trying to process everything they'd learned and figure out how to respond. Kevin, meanwhile, had positioned himself near the entrance to the ballroom, greeting late arriving guests with forced enthusiasm while casting occasional glances in my direction. Rachel stayed close to him, playing the role of supportive fiancée, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. The evening continued, but the celebratory atmosphere had been replaced by something more complicated. People were having the same conversations they would have had at any engagement party, but with an undercurrent of speculation and reassessment. I found myself in the strange position of being the center of attention at someone else's celebration, which was exactly what I'd been trying to avoid for 8 years. Around 9 o'clock, Kevin's father approached me with a whiskey in his hand and a calculating expression on his face. Marcus, I have to say, this evening has been quite illuminating. Kevin tells me you've been very modest about your achievements over the years. I prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate, I said diplomatically. Wise approach. But now that we know more about your background, I'm wondering if you might be interested in some investment opportunities. Kevin and I have been looking at some real estate developments that might benefit from your expertise. And there it was. The shift from polite dismissal to eager courting that I'd witnessed countless times in business settings. Mr. Bradley had spent 2 years treating me as Kevin's slightly unsuccessful future brother-in-law. Now he was treating me as a potential business partner with deep pockets. I appreciate the thought, I said, but I try to keep family and business separate. He looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. Of course. But if you ever change your mind. As the evening wound down, I realized that my 8 years of careful separation between my professional and personal identities had been permanently shattered. There was no going back to being just Rachel's brother who does consulting. From now on, I would be Marcus Patterson, the board member and millionaire entrepreneur. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. The ride back to my hotel was quiet, but my phone was buzzing constantly with messages. Some were from business contacts who had somehow heard about the evening's events. Others were from family members who wanted to know if what they'd heard was really true. But the message that concerned me most was from Rachel, sent at 10:47 p.m. We need to talk tomorrow. Kevin is really struggling with all of this. I'm not sure what to do. I stared at the message for several minutes before responding. Of course. Whatever you need. Back in my hotel room, I loosened my tie and poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar. The evening had been a watershed moment, but I wasn't sure whether I felt relieved or regretful. For 8 years, I'd maintained two separate identities. In the business world, I was Marcus Patterson, strategic consultant and board member, respected for my expertise, and compensated accordingly. In my family world, I was Marcus, the well-meaning but impractical brother who'd never quite gotten his act together. The separation had served multiple purposes. It kept me humble, kept me focused on building my business rather than defending it. And honestly, it had been easier than trying to bridge the gap between my family's expectations and my actual reality. But it had also created a fundamental dishonesty in my relationships with the people who mattered most to me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jennifer, calling from Seattle. I take it the engagement party was eventful, she said, without preamble. How did you— Never mind. Yes, it was eventful. Want to talk about it? For the next hour, I told Jennifer everything. The conversation with Richard Carlson, the shocked reactions from my parents, Kevin's defensive response, Rachel's hurt and anger, and the strange way the entire party had shifted its focus to me instead of celebrating the engaged couple. When I finished, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel about it? She asked finally. Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me feels relieved that I don't have to pretend anymore. But part of me feels guilty for disrupting Rachel's celebration and creating all this family drama. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think your family would have been able to handle the truth if you'd told them gradually over the years? I considered the question. I don't know. Maybe. But every time I tried to share good news about my business, they'd respond with warnings about instability and reminders about the benefits of traditional employment. It became easier to just keep quiet. So they trained you not to share your successes. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, maybe they did. Jennifer sighed. Marcus, I love you, but you've been enabling this dynamic for 8 years. Your family created an environment where your achievements were seen as threats to their narrative about success and stability. Instead of challenging that narrative, you went along with it. She was right, and I knew it. But knowing it didn't make the situation any less complicated. So what do I do now? I asked. Now you deal with the consequences of 8 years of avoidance. You have honest conversations with your parents and your sister. You accept that some relationships might change, and that's okay. And you stop apologizing for being successful. After we hung up, I sat in the dark hotel room thinking about family dynamics, identity, and the strange ways we sometimes protect other people's comfort at the expense of our own authenticity. Tomorrow, I would have to face the aftermath of tonight's revelations. But for now, I was just tired. Tired of maintaining separate identities, tired of managing other people's perceptions, and tired of feeling guilty for building something I was proud of. I woke up to 6 missed calls from my mother and a text message from my father. Son, we need to talk. Can you come by the house before you head back to Chicago? My parents lived in a modest suburban home about 30 minutes from the country club. It was the same house where Rachel and I had grown up, filled with family photos and comfortable furniture that told the story of a middle-class family that valued stability and tradition. When I arrived at 10 a.m., both of my parents were waiting in the living room. My mother had made coffee and arranged store-bought pastries on her good china, which she only used for special occasions or difficult conversations. Marcus, honey, sit down, she said, gesturing to the couch where I'd spent countless hours doing homework and watching television as a kid. My father was in his usual chair, wearing his weekend clothes, but with the serious expression he usually reserved for discussions about finances or family responsibilities. We've been up half the night talking, my mother began, and we have so many questions. I nodded, settling into the couch and accepting a cup of coffee. I figured you would. First, my father said, we need to understand what happened last night. When Richard Carlson said you were featured in Forbes and Harvard Business Review, we thought there might be some mistake, but we looked it up online this morning. He held up a printed copy of the Forbes article about me, with my photograph on the cover and the headline, The Quiet Revolutionary: How Marcus Patterson is Transforming American Manufacturing. This is really you, my mother said, and there was wonder in her voice. Our son is on the cover of Forbes magazine. Yes, Mom, it's really me. But Marcus, she continued, if you've been this successful for years, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us worry about you? It was the same question Rachel had asked, and I'd been thinking about the answer all night. Because every time I tried to share good news about my business, you responded with concern instead of celebration. When I told you about landing big clients, you'd warn me about the dangers of depending on too few customers. When I mentioned expanding my company, you'd remind me about the risks of growing too fast. When I bought a new car or moved to a better apartment, you'd ask if I was being financially responsible. My parents looked at each other, and I could see recognition in their eyes. You created an environment where my success felt like something I needed to defend rather than celebrate. So eventually, I stopped trying to share it with you. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Marcus, we were just worried about you. We wanted you to be secure and stable like Rachel. I know that's what you wanted, I said gently, but your definition of security and stability was very narrow. It only included traditional employment with regular paychecks and corporate benefits. My version of success didn't fit that model, so you couldn't see it as legitimate. My father leaned forward in his chair. Son, we never meant to make you feel like your achievements didn't matter to us. I know you didn't mean to, but that's what happened. We sat in silence for several minutes, each of us processing the implications of this conversation. Finally, my mother spoke. What can we do now? How do we fix this? You can't fix 8 years of miscommunication, I said, but you can start by accepting that my path to success was different from what you expected, and that doesn't make it less valid. We can do that, my father said firmly. Marcus, we're proud of you. We always have been, even when we were worried. But now that we understand what you've built, we're incredibly proud. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. My mother reached over and took my hand. Now tell us everything. We want to know about your company, your clients, your board positions, all of it. We have 8 years of catching up to do. For the next 2 hours, I told my parents the story I'd been keeping from them. How I'd built Patterson Strategic Solutions from nothing, how I'd landed my first major client, how my reputation had grown within the industry, and how I'd eventually been invited to join the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. They listened with rapt attention, asking questions and making comments that showed they were finally seeing me as I actually was, rather than as they'd assumed I was. It felt like meeting my parents for the first time. That afternoon, Rachel called and asked if I could meet her for coffee before I drove back to Chicago. She suggested a small cafe near her apartment, away from family and Kevin's colleagues, and anyone else who might complicate our conversation. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a large coffee mug. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well. "How's Kevin doing?" I asked as I sat down across from her. Rachel sighed. "Not great. He's been alternating between defensive anger and self-doubt. He spent an hour this morning calculating how much money you make per day compared to his annual salary. That's not a healthy exercise." "No, it's not. But I understand why he's doing it. Marcus, do you realize what last night did to him? In one conversation, you went from being the brother he felt slightly sorry for to being the most successful person he's ever met personally." I thought about that. I can see how that would be jarring. It's more than jarring. Kevin's entire identity is built around being a successful provider. He takes pride in his career, his income, his ability to take care of me. Finding out that my brother makes 100 times more than he does has really shaken him. Rachel, I never wanted to create a competition between Kevin and me. I've tried to be supportive of your relationship and respectful of what he brings to your life. I know that. And honestly, that almost makes it worse for him. He's been condescending to you for 2 years, offering to refer business to your little consulting company, and you've just taken it graciously. Now he's realizing that you were being polite while knowing you could buy and sell his entire firm. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but she was right. Kevin had spent 2 years positioning himself as the successful family member who could help me with my struggling business. Learning that our positions were reversed, dramatically reversed, had to be humiliating. "What can I do to help?" I asked. Rachel looked at me for a long moment. "Honestly, I'm not sure there's anything you can do. Kevin needs to work through his feelings about this on his own. But Marcus, I need you to understand something." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm hurt that you kept this from us for so long. I understand your reasons, and I even agree with some of them. But it hurts to know that my brother didn't trust me enough to share the most important parts of his life." "Rachel, it wasn't about trust." "Yes, it was," she interrupted. "It was about trust, and it was about respect. You didn't trust us to handle your success appropriately, and you didn't respect us enough to give us the chance to prove you wrong. That hit harder than I'd expected because there was truth in it. You're right, I said quietly. I made assumptions about how you'd react, and I used those assumptions to justify keeping you at arm's length. That wasn't fair to you. Thank you for saying that. We sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. So where do we go from here? I asked eventually. Rachel smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. We figure it out as we go. The family dynamic has changed, and we can't go back to the way things were, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's good that you don't have to pretend to be less successful than you are. Maybe it's good that Mom and Dad finally understand what you've accomplished. And maybe it's good that Kevin and I have to confront some assumptions we've been making about success and family roles. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Marcus. I always have been, even when I didn't understand what you were building. But now that I do understand, I'm amazed by what you've accomplished. Thank you, Rach. That means everything to me. Just next time you're featured on the cover of a national magazine, maybe give us a heads up? I laughed. Deal. The weeks following Rachel's engagement party brought a series of adjustments as our family learned to navigate a new reality. My parents began forwarding me business articles they thought I'd find interesting, and my father started mentioning my Forbes cover to his friends with obvious pride. Rachel and Kevin postponed their wedding planning temporarily, while Kevin worked through his feelings about the revelation. Rachel kept me updated through occasional phone calls and text messages, and while the situation was clearly difficult for both of them, she seemed confident they'd work through it. Meanwhile, my professional life continued to accelerate. The Meridian Asia expansion project was approved, generating significant media attention and several new client inquiries. Industry Week followed through on their cover story proposal, and I was invited to speak at conferences in London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. But the most significant change was internal. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to maintain separate identities for my professional and personal lives. When business colleagues asked about my family, I could mention them naturally instead of deflecting. When family members asked about my work, I could share details instead of giving vague answers. The integration wasn't always smooth. My mother still occasionally made comments that revealed she didn't quite understand the scale of my business, and some extended family members began treating me differently once word spread about my financial success. But overall, the honesty was liberating. 3 months after the engagement party, Rachel called with news. Kevin and I had a breakthrough in couples therapy yesterday, she said. He's finally ready to talk to you. That's great, Rach. What changed? He realized that his reaction to your success said more about his own insecurities than it did about you. He's been working on separating his self-worth from his bank account, and it's been really healthy for him. The following weekend, Kevin and Rachel drove to Chicago to visit me. It was the first time Kevin had been to my apartment, and I could see him taking in the details: the downtown location, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the high-end furnishings that reflected my actual financial situation, rather than the struggling consultant persona I'd maintained for years. "This is really nice, Marcus," he said, as we stood on my balcony overlooking the city. "Great view." "Thanks. I've been here about 3 years now." We made small talk for a few minutes before Kevin brought up what was really on his mind. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For the past 2 years, I've been condescending to you about your career. I thought I was being encouraging, but I was actually being patronizing." "Kevin, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I need to say this." He took a deep breath. "I built my identity around being the successful guy who was good enough for Rachel. Finding out that you're more successful than I am, dramatically more successful, challenged that identity in a way that I wasn't prepared for. He paused, looking out at the city skyline. But I've realized that your success doesn't diminish mine. We're both successful in our own ways, and we both love Rachel. That's what matters. I extended my hand, and he shook it firmly. I'm glad we're having this conversation, I said. And for what it's worth, I think you're perfect for Rachel. Success isn't just about money, it's about building something meaningful. You and Rachel are building a life together, and that's incredibly valuable. Kevin smiled. Thanks, Marcus. That actually means a lot coming from you. 6 months after the engagement party, life had settled into a new rhythm. My parents now bragged about my achievements to their friends with the same enthusiasm they'd always shown for Rachel's accomplishments. Rachel and Kevin had resumed their wedding planning, with Kevin showing genuine interest in my business and occasionally asking for advice about his own career development. The family dynamic had fundamentally shifted, but in ways that felt healthier and more authentic than before. I was in my Chicago office on a Thursday afternoon when my assistant announced that my parents were on the phone. Marcus, honey, we have some news, my mother said when I picked up. Your father and I are planning to retire next year, and we've been thinking about what we want to do with our savings. That's great, Mom. You've both worked hard. You deserve to enjoy retirement. Well, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. We have about $400,000 saved up, and we were wondering if you might have some investment advice for us. I smiled. A year ago, they wouldn't have dreamed of asking me for financial advice. Now they were treating me as an expert whose opinion they valued. I'd be happy to help you think through your options, I said. Why don't you come visit me next weekend, and we can review your financial situation together? After we hung up, I reflected on how much had changed since that night at the country club. The revelation of my professional success had forced difficult conversations, challenged comfortable assumptions, and temporarily created tension within the family. But it had also created opportunities for more authentic relationships. My parents now saw me as I actually was, rather than as they'd assumed I was. Rachel and I had worked through the hurt and misunderstandings that had accumulated over 8 years of partial honesty. Even Kevin had grown from the experience, learning to separate his self-worth from external measures of success. The family member they'd worried about for 8 years had turned out to be the most financially successful among them. But more importantly, we'd all learned that success comes in many forms, and that authentic relationships require honest communication about who we are and what we've accomplished. As I sit in my office today, looking out at the Chicago skyline and preparing for another board meeting, I think about the journey that brought me here. 8 years of building a business, maintaining separate identities, and carefully managing other people's perceptions of my success. The night of Rachel's engagement party changed everything, but not in the ways I expected. Yes, my family finally learned about my professional achievements and financial success. But more importantly, we all learned about the costs of assumptions, the value of authentic communication, and the difference between protecting someone's feelings and enabling their misconceptions. My parents spent 8 years worrying about my financial stability while I was building a multi-million-dollar company. Rachel spent 8 years offering me career advice while I was advising Fortune 500 CEOs. Kevin spent 2 years condescending to me about business while I was sitting on corporate boards that managed billions in revenue. These misconceptions weren't entirely their fault. I had enabled them by choosing comfort over honesty, by allowing them to maintain their preferred narrative rather than challenging it with inconvenient facts. But the revelation, when it finally came, created opportunities for growth that wouldn't have existed otherwise. My parents learned that success doesn't always follow traditional paths, and that their son's unconventional choices had led to extraordinary results. Rachel learned that she didn't need to protect me from the supposed instability of entrepreneurship. Kevin learned that his worth as a partner wasn't dependent on being the most financially successful person in the room. And I learned that hiding your achievements to make other people comfortable is a form of dishonesty that ultimately serves no one. Today, my relationship with my family is stronger than it's ever been. We communicate more honestly, celebrate each other's successes more genuinely, and support each other more effectively. My parents are proud of both their children's accomplishments in their respective fields. Rachel and Kevin are planning a wedding that reflects their values rather than anyone else's expectations. And I no longer have to maintain separate identities for different parts of my life. The business continues to grow. Patterson Strategic Solutions now employs over 60 people and generates annual revenue of $43 million. I've been invited to join 2 additional corporate boards, and we're expanding our services into European markets. Next month, I'll be speaking at the World Economic Forum about the future of manufacturing efficiency. But the professional success, while gratifying, isn't what I'm most proud of. What I'm most proud of is the authentic relationships I now have with the people who matter most to me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever downplayed your achievements to make others comfortable, if you've ever been the one they whisper about with pity while praising someone else's mediocre accomplishments, I want you to know that your success matters. Your achievements deserve to be celebrated, not hidden. And the people who truly love you will learn to celebrate with you, even if it challenges their assumptions about what success looks like. The hardest part isn't building the business or achieving the recognition or earning the money. The hardest part is believing that you deserve those things and that the people who love you will want to share in your joy rather than diminish it. 8 years ago, I thought I was protecting my family by keeping my success hidden. What I was really doing was protecting myself from the possibility that they might not be as proud of me as I hoped they would be. I'm grateful that I was wrong about that. They were proud of me all along. They just needed to understand what I'd actually accomplished. Today, there are no more secrets, no more separate identities, and no more apologizing for building something I'm proud of. There's just a family that supports each other, celebrates each other's successes, and faces challenges together. And that, more than any board position or magazine cover or financial milestone, is what real success looks like. That's my story. How 8 years of hidden success finally came to light at the worst possible moment, and how it ultimately brought my family closer together than we'd ever been before. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Have you ever felt underestimated by people who should support you? Have you ever hidden your achievements to make others comfortable? I'd love to hear your experiences. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories about family drama, workplace dynamics, and the complicated relationships we navigate while building the lives we want. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss new uploads. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love connecting with viewers from around the globe who understand that success isn't always what it appears to be from the outside. Until next time, remember that your achievements matter, your success deserves to be celebrated, and the people who truly love you will learn to celebrate with you. Don't make the mistake I made of hiding your light to make others comfortable. Shine brightly, and trust that the right people will want to shine alongside you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.